Dear participants, I am honored to welcome you on behalf of the European Institute of Romania to this new dialogue in our debate series, European News in the Spotlight. In today's discussion, Enhancing Resilience and Countering Hybrid Threats in Europe, we will try to explore the shift defining contemporary European security. It is particularly timely as we align our focus with the strategic priorities set by the Danish presidency of the Council of the EU, which rightly places a secure Europe at the heart of its mandate. This ambition, a strong, secure Europe in a changing world, requires a rational approach and utmost accuracy in understanding and addressing the nature of the threats we face. The strategic response to hybrid threats is to be rooted in the resilience concept that shifts the focus from simply preventing attacks to ensuring system continuity and adaptability under menace. We are privileged today to have a panel that brings together insights from in-depth geopolitical analysis experts and important domestic perspectives from our colleagues across Romania, Latvia, and Poland. I would like to thank all the guests today for accepting our invitation and for contributing to this topic. And now let me give the floor to my colleague Mihai Sebe, Head of European Affairs Department, who will introduce the speakers and moderate the discussion. Mihai, please, you have the floor.
Yeah, Ms. Mocanu, thank you so much for your kind introduction. So first and foremost, I want to welcome you in this online chat about a very important topic in Europe, the question of resilience and countering hybrid threats. And now, as we have seen in the agenda, we have a stellar lot of speakers from Romania and abroad that are going to present us both national Romanian perspective, European perspective, and also their own country perspective. In that context, I want to invite Ms. Alina Bărgăoanu, professor at the National University of Political Studies and Public Administration and president of the ER Administrative Board, to open the floor and give us her insight about why enhancing resilience matters and how we can counter hybrid threats in Europe. Ms. Bărgăoanu, you have the floor.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much, Mihai, for giving me the floor. First of all, let me also welcome you on behalf of the European Institute of Romania, since I am the president of the board. I think that the Institute is one of the few accurate voices left in Romania, encouraging quality debate about European issues, and I'm very happy to be part of this endeavor together with my very dear colleagues from the Institute. Regarding the topic, the substance of our debate today, first of all, I would like to, without starting a lecture, of course, I will start to by making some conceptual clarifications, picking up on from what Oana said, that in this field we need to be very, very precise and we need to be very, very accurate. In order to solve the problem first, you have to understand it and then to define it. But it will be short, you don't have to worry. So on a concept note, in order to make sure that we are somehow on the same page, I would make the point that hybrid warfare combines, as you know already, conventional and unconventional tactics, such as diplomatic, economic, political, cyber, and informational, in order to create a multi-layered and a very subtle attack, which is very difficult, very, very often it is very difficult to detect, to attribute, and to counter. And I would make the point that these tactics from the political field, from the diplomatic field, from the cyber and informational field, do not act separately. I think this is one of the big misunderstandings, and this is why I wanted to open the floor with this clarification, that these tactics, cyber, diplomatic, economic, and informational, do not play out separately, but they interact with one another, they reinforce one another. And the last point that regarding this conceptual clarification is that we are not talking, in my understanding at least, about hybrid versus conventional, but it is more of a continuum. I think that still the public debate is penetrated by this idea that hybrid warfare is in one box and conventional warfare is in another box. Whereas I think that we are talking about a continuum, and about probably in contemporary times the attempts for the hybrid warfare to replace conventional warfare altogether, but by attaining the same objectives. There are some authors even suggesting that we should abandon the term of hybrid warfare altogether, because wars have always been hybrid. I mean, analytically, this doesn't carry too much weight. But again, my main point is that the tactics regarding the military, the diplomatic, the cyber, and the informational field reinforce one another. And I think it is an error in conceptual and also in practical terms to separate, to conceive of them in a separate way. The second large point that I would like to make in order to start the conversation is about political and information warfare, which in my understanding and given my background is the most important tool used in the hybrid warfare. And again, regarding political and information warfare, I think that very often the discussion is simplified talking about disinformation, and after that, this subject has become very politicized and very polarized. Who decides what is information, what is disinformation, and stuff like this. This is why I would like to make the point that the toolbox of political and information warfare is much larger, and it includes disinformation, of course, propaganda, hostile influence campaign, hostile information campaign, malvertising, cyber attacks, cyber intelligence, cyber espionage, data harvesting, micro-targeting, weaponization of history, weaponization of diasporas. So again, the toolbox which can be put under the name of political and information warfare is much, much wider than the topic of disinformation. So again, I felt the need to put these terms on the table even in front of a very distinguished audience, whom I'm sure is very familiar with them, in order to, because I even these days in the public discourse, and not only in Romania, I could see some ideas that hybrid precedes conventional, that hybrid is not important, that we should focus on disinformation, but cyber attacks are in a different area. So again, my point is that hybrid warfare combines military and non-military means. Among the non-military means, the information and political warfare is, in my understanding, the most prominent tactic and probably even the cheapest one. And then to follow the instruction of the moderator to talk about how to build resilience against this type of warfare. So I will jump to the topic of conclusions, only some general things, and I'm open for debate and for questions. In my understanding, there are some things in order to counter hybrid threats, which have to do with the hybrid threats as such, and some actions which go beyond the field of hybrid threats as such. So there are some measures. Again, I'm sure that most of you are familiar with this. In my understanding, I do not see how we can counter hybrid threats without permanent structures. By this, I do not understand the Minister of Truth and all crazy ideas that are sometimes associated in a very inaccurate way with such steps. But I don't think that without permanent structures that provide for ownership and for coordination, we can have a robust answer to this topic of hybrid threats. Probably you have heard that I think yesterday the Italian Minister of Defense had a very, very precise and very dramatic statement saying that the European Union is under an asymmetrical type of warfare, that we have woken very late to that threat, And in very specific terms and feeding into what I have just said, he suggested that we should create that a European Center for Countering Hybrid Threats should be created. And he suggested that, for example, in order to make such a European center operational, 1,500 people should be hired. So that was his statement. We should reflect ourselves whether this is a realistic idea, whether it is practical. But I completely agree with the idea that without permanent structures which provide for ownership and for coordination, we have no chance. We'll stick only to conversations, contemplating the phenomena and not come up with very strong measures. Another not solution, the term solution is an oversimplification, but for the sake of simplicity, another response to hybrid threats is to come up with precise attribution. I know that since hybrid threats are often, I have just said a few minutes ago, that hybrid threats are sometimes very difficult to detect and to attribute. So attribution is definitely a complex thing. But when we have the hard technical data, I think that one of the solutions to provide for deterrence in the field of hybrid threats is to come up with precise attribution. And not to attribute on the state directly, oh, this is Russia, this is China, but to be very precise which actor is deploying the hybrid action, what are the evidence for it, and to avoid alienating the state altogether. This is the Singapore's way of dealing with hybrid threats. So they are not blaming China in general, but they do a lot of precise attribution, which specific actors are at the heart of a hybrid action, and whether it is affiliated, whether it is aligned, whether it is out of the ideological reasons. So I think that the Singapore's example in doing precise attribution could be something into which to look very, very closely. The third solution or the third action to hybrid threats exceed the topic of hybrid threats as such. I think that culture and nation branding and tech diplomacy are also a solution to increase resilience of our societies. And the fourth solution, and I will stop here in order to allow for the space for the other speakers and for some debate, it is strong government and Stratcom communication. So again, I think that some of the toolbox in order to react to hybrid threats, first of all, to be really aware, to really believe that this is a threat, to understand the nature of the threat, to come up with permanent structures that provide for ownership and coordination, to do precise attribution and not to just to attach some labels to some actors, to do culture and tech branding, tech diplomacy, and finally strong government communication and strat communication. And since we are in a pan-European encounter ourselves, it is not enough to do it at a national level, but definitely the need is to do it transnationally. I don't think that hybrid threats is a beauty contest. I mean, we are more resilient, you are less resilient, but I think that the European Union as a whole should be resilient. This is why pan-European structures are very important, but in the end, the resilience is a very local and culturally embedded phenomenon. I will stop here, and I'm looking forward to the other points of view and to the debate.
Yeah, Professor Brăgoanu, thank you so much for setting up the terminological space where we are dealing and possible solutions. And as mentioned, the need for an EU-wide solution, I'd like now to invite Ms. Rauha Maia Ranico, Special Advisor for International Relations from the European Center of Excellence for Countering Hybrid Threats. Ms. Ranico, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, moderator. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Rauha Rannikko. I work in the European Centre of Excellence for Countering Hybrid Threats, hybrid COE for short. As the previous speaker mentioned, we are the note from the Italian Defense Minister. We are actually the European Center for Countering Hybrid Threats. But what we do, we produce analysis, advice, and exercises for the EU member states, but also for the NATO allies. We are an independent entity. We are not part of the EU structures. So today I'm going to speak about the EU measures in countering hybrid threats from the hybrid COE perspective. A little bit referring to the previous speaker's comments on the terminology question, I also wanted to highlight that we have tried to emphasize the use of similar terms when we talk about hybrid threats. We determine, and this is broadly used in the EU institutions as well, we determine hybrid threats as something that fall right under the threshold of armed conflict. They occur systematically, and usually several tools are used simultaneously. This means that many hybrid operations can occur at the same time or with very close proximity to each other to create confusion. It's also argued that hybrid threats, the main target of hybrid threats is to influence the decision-making of democratic governments. Nowadays, we could say that the target can be considered more broader and more severe, targeting the societies of our democracies. As mentioned in the beginning, hybrid threats is a security policy priority for the EU, and the Danish presidency has brought it up very well during this fall. I wanted to highlight a few countermeasures in hybrid, or a few measures in countering hybrid threats, and I would divide them broadly into 4 categories. First is situational awareness. Second, resilience building. Third, countermeasures, and fourth, cooperation with other entities. First, on the situational awareness framework, EU has put really big efforts into building up-to-date picture on hybrid threat incidents. The situational awareness in EU consists of member states' intelligence reporting, and then there is a hybrid fusion cell which compiles analysis for the EU and the member states altogether. There is also under the EU Council a rapid alert system where member states can report and inform other member states about incidents in real time. During a crisis situation, EU has a mechanism called, or EU Council and member state have a mechanism called integrated political crisis response mechanism. This can be activated by the EU presidency per request of a member state. And then an example during the European Parliament elections or just before it, this mechanism was activated because of the disinformation operations encircling the elections. Additionally, EU External Action Service has also other kind of tools in their use. There is the Stratcom Task Force and EU versus Disinfo, which focus on monitoring information threats and enhancing strategic communications. Then on the second measure or the category I mentioned, resilience building. This year, EU published the Preparedness Union strategy, which aims to prepare all member states, including individual citizens, to unpredictable threats, from man-made threats to natural disasters. The preparedness concept, which is now hoped to be implemented in all member states, has taken inspiration from the Nordic preparedness models. This Preparedness Union strategy highlights that all citizens in member states should be aware of what kind of risks may interrupt their daily lives, like a several-day blackout, shortages in food delivery. And this is, it highlights how they should be prepared, have a stockpile at home to prepare for these kind of situations. It also, the strategy includes preparation and coordination recommendations, as already mentioned, highlighted by the previous speaker. These are very important when enhancing whole of government approach. Additionally, EU has some other strategies in place, like the Critical Entities Directive, NIS2 Directive. There's also the Democracy Shield and Digital Services Act, which aim to make us more resilient for different kind of situations, a cyber attack, information operations, an attack on our critical infrastructure systems, and so on. To conclude on the resilience measures, these are being put to place to make us more prepared, make citizens more prepared, but they will not necessarily prevent the hybrid attack from happening. Therefore, I'm going to talk about the third category in place, which is countermeasures. Already in 2022, EU Strategic Compass highlighted some toolboxes that would need to be put into place to create countermeasures to different threats. There are several toolboxes that EU has in use. There's a hybrid toolbox, cyber diplomacy toolbox, and foreign information manipulation toolbox. Under a crisis situation, a member state can activate one of these toolboxes, which includes several instruments. For example, from public statements and strategic communications to deployment of hybrid rapid response teams, which are sort of an advisory team that can be sent to an affected member state for support and advice. Countermeasures, I would also divide into 3 categories: proactive, passive, and reactive measures. For example, ahead of elections, strategic communications by election officials can be considered as a proactive measure, as they aim to inform the citizens about possible dis- and misinformation campaign encircling the elections. And passive countermeasure, I would call a public acknowledgement of, for example, a cable cut done for an underwater sea cable, and public statement saying that this cable will be quickly repaired, but no attribution will be done. This highlights the resilience building capacity of restoring and repairing critical infrastructure. Then finally, on the reactive countermeasures, I would like to highlight the EU sanctions and legal options in use. So, for example, EU has imposed 18 sanction packages against Russia since the 2022 attack on Ukraine. EU has both economic and legal sanctions in use, and these create new obstacles for the threat actors to commit hybrid operations. Finally, on the cooperation aspect, the 4th category in measures countering hybrid threats. Cooperation is really important. As already mentioned, these are cross-border, cross-domain nature threats, and cooperation is needed within the EU, within the member states, but also in the governments and societies in the member states. As it goes through like a natural disaster, crisis response mechanisms need to be in place in case of a blackout or a sabotage incident. In addition, most of the European countries are also NATO allies, and therefore EU needs to cooperate closely with the NATO as they have complementary toolboxes in use. For example, as mentioned, EU has the sanctions and a legal power in use. NATO, on the other hand, can display deterrence to military power in regions where security has deteriorated. This is how these toolboxes complement each other. Also, EU has tightened its cooperation with 3rd countries. This is quite important, especially with the Far East countries like Japan, South Korea, and Australia, to understand in what kind of a hybrid threat environment they're experiencing in the Asia Pacific, and to share experiences. I'll conclude my presentation here to these four different categories of measures in countering hybrid threats, and looking forward to the discussion in the Q&A session. Thank you.
Thank you so much for bringing us the great European perspective on that and how we can deal with it at a global level. And one of the key ideas that from the beginning is the fact that civil society and think tanks play a key role. For that purpose, I'd like to invite Mr. Marius Ghincea, Program Director, Foreign and Security Policy at Quartet Institute from Romania. Mr. Ghincea, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Sebe. Thank you very much for offering me the opportunity to share some ideas. I'm not a specialist on hybrid warfare, but I did work on several projects involving foreign information manipulation. And from an academic perspective, I analyzed the implications of hybrid actions in the Black Sea region and in Eastern Europe. And I would like to share some ideas which are more on the academic side of this debate, and to emphasize some of the critical issues I think that we still have in this debate about hybrid warfare and the way we respond to these actions by malign actors. I think that what most of the policy-oriented, practitioner-oriented, or academic-oriented research has done over the past few years when it comes to hybrid warfare was to develop a quite long laundry list of actions, items, strategies, types of behavior that we classify under one definition or another as hybrid warfare, and we basically try to understand how they operate, what are the intentions behind the various hybrid strategies deployed by countries such as Russia or other malign actors. But this research, both from a policy perspective but also from an academic perspective, has mostly remained descriptive. We tend to build inventories of actions, of strategies, of tools developed by malign actors. We try to develop countermeasures, but we do not necessarily aim to answer some more substantive questions about under what conditions do some of these hybrid war strategies deployed by actors such as Russia tend to be actually effective, right? If we look at the mountains of policy briefs or academic articles on hybrid warfare, we tend to imply in much of this literature that because they are using hybrid warfare is effective. It works in most cases, right? And what we have seen recently in Moldova, for instance, but also in other places, is that hybrid warfare and generally a diversity of such strategies which are associated with hybrid warfare or with information manipulation are not always effective. We have seen during the elections in Moldova, both in the presidential elections last year and in the parliamentary elections earlier this year, that the Russian Federation has used an entire panoply of tools and strategies and mobilized significant resources to undermine the liberal government in Chisinau in Moldova. And I think that most of us will classify most of those actions undertaken either by Russian state actors or Russian non-state actors as pertaining to forms of hybrid warfare. The government in Moldova definitely framed them as such. And yet, what we have seen in Moldova was that the government was actually quite successful in overcoming all these challenges coming from Russia, either the government actors or non-government actors, and was able to control the information environment and to push back against the hybrid actions pursued by the Russian actors, which raises an important question that I think that both academics and practitioners could think about more. Under what conditions do hybrid war tactics or strategies are actually effective? I think that from a more policy-oriented perspective, this answering such a question will be interesting and important, because generally when we are seeking to fight against hybrid warfare tactics by countries such as Russia, we tend to have limited resources, right? Our countries have limited resources that can allocate to fighting this type of actions, and therefore we would want to prioritize the allocation of our resources to those cases where we think that the conditions are proper for those hybrid warfare actions to actually be successful, and not to allocate or prioritize resources to those situations or cases where we do not think that the conditions are proper for hybrid warfare to actually be effective, to succeed. So I think that what as a community, both from the academic and the policy direction, will be interesting to pursue in the coming years will be to move a bit from the descriptive side of this analysis of hybrid warfare and more towards a more causal inference direction, looking at cases where hybrid warfare has succeeded in achieving the purported objectives of a malign actor, and cases where it failed. And then to ask the question, why do we see success in some cases and failure in some other cases? Under what conditions does hybrid warfare actually work, right? And from this point of view, I think that from Central and Eastern Europe, from our region, from the Black Sea region, what we observe is that one condition which is important for the success of hybrid warfare is for governments not to necessarily be very keen or open to actually confront directly, publicly, and politically this type of hybrid warfare tactics. If we compare, for instance, Romania and Bulgaria, or Romania and Moldova for this matter, because I was mentioning Moldova earlier. In Moldova, the most of the Russian oriented hybrid tactics against the Moldovan government and against the Moldovan society have not achieved their political objectives. In Romania's case, however, most of these types of hybrid actions are organized by non-state actors from Romania, Romanian domestic actors, or foreign Russian aligned actors. What we have seen over the past year and a half is that these actions have been significantly more successful. And then the question that emerges from this is, why do we see success in Romania and failure in Moldova from the perspective of the malign actor that engages in some form of hybrid warfare? And one key condition that I think deserves attention is the desire of the incumbent elites or of the government to actually engage in public denunciation and public confrontation of the malign actor who is engaging in this type of actions. In Romania, the Romanian government, the previous Romanian government, has been very reluctant to respond in any meaningful way to what was visible as forms of hybrid warfare in Romanian society, whereas in the case of Moldova, the Moldovan government has been much more open, much more forthcoming, and much more assertive in pushing against this type of tactics. So comparing negative and positive cases where hybrid warfare succeeded versus cases where it failed, we may actually be able to learn the conditions under which hybrid warfare tactics can operate successfully, effectively, and when they cannot. And this can help us both to prioritize the allocation of resources, but also to develop more specific counter responses to these tactics that can basically can target not necessarily the actions of the hybrid strategy related to the hybrid strategy to the malign actor, but also to the underlying societal or institutional conditions. Because we can hardly stop countries such as Russia in engaging in forms of hybrid warfare. We have not been able to deter the Russian government or Russian affiliated actors in engaging in this type of strategies. But if the success of this type of hybrid strategies depends on the contextual conditions in the targeted societies, then maybe we can work on that front to change the conditions in such a way that these strategies are no longer effective. So the key point I want to transmit in this workshop is that we need to move away from the descriptive analysis of what's happening and to ask questions such as under what conditions, why, and how can we understand better the conditions under which hybrid warfare is actually effective. And I'm going to stop here. I'm looking forward to your comments and questions later on. Thank you.
Thank you so much for emphasizing the importance of going from theory to practice. And in that context, I'd like to invite Ms. Beata Lipdanska, a researcher from the Latvian Institute of International Affairs. And Ms. Lipdanska, first and foremost, happy belated National Day, as I know that you recently celebrated National Day of Latvia. And now we have the floor.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for inviting me to this discussion, and also thank you. We indeed had Independence Day celebrations this past weekend, and therefore I think this discussion fits very well into the agenda, even more so because we all know the reality, unfortunate reality of the Baltic states. How they are basically being under hybrid attacks almost every day for the past years, mainly from Russia and from Belarus also. So therefore, this is a very vital discussion to have. also to hear all of your colleagues' insights and also to hear some ideas how we can tackle this issue. But my speech today will focus on what the Baltic states have done in order to prevent hybrid attacks, to prevent disinformation campaigns, and etc. and etc. Therefore, I will focus on the tangible actions and initiatives undertaken by the three Baltic states, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia as well, how they have strengthened both institutional and societal resilience against hybrid threats and attacks. For the Baltic states, hybrid threats, unfortunately, like I said, is a daily reality. As a region on the eastern flank of NATO and the European Union, our experience, especially in light of Russia's continued aggression and also Belarus' continued aggression, if I may, has led us to adopt a whole of society approach to security. Moving quickly from planning to implementation. And therefore, the first thing that I want to talk about today is about strengthening institutional resilience, meaning strategic and critical actions taken. Institutional resilience is about making the state and its critical functions difficult to disrupt, basically. And what the Baltic states have done, they have focused heavily on fortifying physical and digital backbone of the countries. And here it's very important to first talk about energy security and connectivity. Baltic states have achieved a fundamental step for shared European security, started from February 2025 by disconnecting from the Belarus-Russia electricity grid called the BREL, and successfully joining continental Europe's electricity grid. This is actually a very big step away from Russia's influence, which plays a crucial role by attacking the Baltic states. Therefore, this is a very important step taken by the Baltic states. And if I may, it was also a step that was necessary a long time ago, yet it was very difficult to take this step. But we did so anyway. Also, the Baltic states have completely stopped importing gas from Russia. Since the start of Russia's full-scale war in Ukraine back in 2022, we now rely on secure supplies, including US LNG, utilizing facilities like the one in Klaipėda terminal, which is located in Lithuania, as you all know, of course. Also, important step is the Rail Baltica project, which of course is a bit difficult nowadays, but this project is now viewed mostly as a critical element of Europe's security and defense architecture, basically contributing directly to military mobility capabilities and resilience along the EU's eastern flank. Therefore, continuing to work on this project and to see how this is implemented in real life is very vital and very important. Another important thing in this institutional aspect is, of course, critical infrastructure and technology. The Baltic states strongly support closer cooperation on the protection of critical infrastructure, both offshore and onshore. Of course, this includes national investments in security tools like anti-drone systems and monitoring systems for undersea cables as well. I do believe that you all are experts here, and you have heard the news about Russia's drones flying into Poland's airspace, Lithuania's airspace, and etc. So therefore, this is really important to be one step ahead. Even though this is really difficult yet, slowly, but the Baltic states are trying to indeed be one step ahead and prevent these hybrid attacks from happening. Also, the Baltic states are coordinating actions against the growing threat of GNSS, jamming and spoofing, meaning deliberate hybrid activities by Russia and Belarus together, which poses serious risks to aviation and maritime safety. And they are enhancing digital resilience by ensuring the physical presence of major cloud service providers called hyperscalers in the Baltic region, and by implementing new fiber optic routes like the Baltic Ring project for regional connectivity resilience building. Therefore, all of the three Baltic states are working on these necessary steps together, which is also very important in order to achieve these goals for all of the three Baltic states, and also Poland in some instances, to work together. Another important step is fostering societal resilience. And here I would like to talk a bit more about information campaigns and civil preparedness, because we all know that civic preparedness is very important when we are talking about how resilient we can be. Therefore, how resilient is our society. This is very, very important aspect. So societal resilience ensures basically that the Baltic states, the population of the Baltic states is informed and resistant to manipulation, which is the ultimate target in some instances of these hybrid attacks. Here, of course, I don't want to go too deep into history because, of course, our time of discussion today is limited. But for example, from Latvia's point of view, Russia's manipulation with information and with information sphere, for example, in Latvia, is yet limited now, but before 2022 was very present. Therefore, this is a very vital step to think about how to make our society more resistant to manipulation, specifically Russia's manipulation campaigns, propaganda campaigns, who were directly happening by influencing the sphere of information, and those who were especially sensitive to these campaigns were, of course, people, the part of population who spoke Russian. Yeah, so that's very important. How this countering information manipulation basically is happening in praxis. Foreign information manipulation and interference, particularly from Russia, like I said, and also in some instances now we see that these campaigns are coming from Belarus as well. Remains a key threat to our information environment, and all three Baltic states, especially Latvia and Lithuania, in their national policy have stated that securing information sphere is a very vital part of how our society can be resilient to these hybrid attacks. Also, the defense strategy of the Baltic states promotes critical thinking, media literacy, digital AI skills, and civic participation in education. What Baltic states are doing, they are relying on independent, well-funded and resilient public service media. In Latvia, this is Latvian National News Service, LSM. In Estonia, it's ERR, and in Lithuania, it's LRT. Basically, relying on them as a cornerstone of democratic society. And using platforms like the European Broadcasting Union's European perspective to share reliable content and strengthen cohesion. Furthermore, the Baltic states are focusing on artificial intelligence as a resilience tool. For example, the Baltic states are developing their own artificial intelligence solutions, such as the open source called Tilde Open LLM, which has built-in resilience to information manipulation. So that's what we are doing in practice, which is also a very big step. Another important aspect is civil defense and crisis management. The Baltic states are improving civil protection capabilities, including the establishment of civil defense shelters, strengthening early warning systems, and maintaining contingency of vital services. They are placing emphasis on testing mechanisms for the mass evacuation of civilians, including, of course, cross-border situations by involving national, local, volunteer and private sector resources. These drills are happening, but of course, for example, in the context of Latvia, we have to understand that this is not happening on national level. This is more shattered across municipal level. And also the Baltic states have recently signed a memorandum of understanding on strengthening regional civil protection, who also, this memorandum was joined by Poland to enhance the effective management of mass movements of people, including, of course, large-scale evacuations. In conclusion, I would like to add that the Baltic states, the experience of the Baltic states is defined by practical and decisive actions, starting from synchronizing our electricity grid with Europe, which was a very big and vital step towards moving away from Russia's influence, to building new defense lines, to actively combating disinformation with media literacy and advanced AI. The Baltic states are committed to a holistic, if I may, a whole of a society approach to security. Basically stating that we understand that in order to be resilient, we have to involve our society. And for our societies to be involved, they need to be informed. And not only informed on paper, but also informed by knowing practical skills and how to operate under, for example, crisis situations. And by strengthening the institutions of the Baltic states and cultivating social immunity, the Baltic states, of course, aims to ensure that aggression is never rewarded, and that freedom and sovereignty will always be defended. And this is a very important conclusion point, because what the Baltic states have experienced in the last couple of years, whether those are Russia's misinformation campaigns, disinformation campaigns targeted towards Baltic states, or direct hybrid threats, meaning, for example, migration attacks, migration crisis towards EU's external borders, which still is orchestrated by Belarus. We of course understand the importance and seriousness of this situation. Therefore, practical steps must be taken, and slowly, step by step, we are getting there. But how the Baltic states are doing this is by cooperating together, all three of the Baltic states and Poland in some instances as well. Therefore, by working together, we can build this resilient society. Thank you.
Thank you so much for reminding us the importance of protecting critical infrastructure and also the physical aspects of resilience. And you mentioned as keywords for me, critical thinking and your defense strategy that tackles that. In that context, I would like now to invite Ms. Oana Popescu-Zamfir, the director from Global Focus Romania. Ms. Popescu, you have the floor.
Hi, and thank you for the invitation. I think we have a full inventory by now of what's being done, and so I'm going to try to be brief and not repeat what's been said already. I would just like to emphasize a few things. One is that we still have an issue of terminology and a conceptual issue, let's say, which hampers addressing hybrid threats to some extent. One of the reasons is that there's not really agreement between the EU and NATO when it comes to what constitutes hybrid, what falls under this sphere, and what we call it. As far as I know, also the Secretary General of NATO, for instance, has his own opinion, and he doesn't like the term hybrid altogether. And maybe one of the good reasons for it is that just like in this debate, when we just say hybrid, we basically cover such an extensive array of issues that are so different from one another that it becomes difficult to address them all within the same framework. So that in itself, I think, continues to be an issue both at member state level, because we don't have that kind of conceptual clarity. And so we don't have a streamlining of instruments with which to address this kind of challenges. The other one that sort of derives from this and from the very eclectic nature of these threats is that what I feel we're still missing are cross-cutting, cross-sectorial mechanisms in place that fall not as much between civilian and military as they should cover both. So just as we have dual use infrastructure and dual use equipment and so on and so forth, we could probably be working more on developing this sort of intersection between civil and military instruments addressing hybrid threats, because at this point we don't have a full integration of all relevant stakeholders, whether they be private sector or civil society or local authorities and so on and so forth, in the architecture that's meant to fight hybrid threats. Just recently, we organized a conference in Constanța on Black Sea resilience as part of the EU approach to the strategic approach to the Black Sea. And we had a very interesting conversation with a representative of the Netherlands who described how at national level they managed to bring together, and they only managed to some extent, it's still work in progress, so to bring together under the same umbrella the institutions with a role in maritime security, for instance, to bring together critical infrastructure protection with the relevant stakeholders under the Ministry of Economy, Defense, Foreign Affairs, Interior, and so on and so forth, transport, of course. So only to develop that kind of mechanism which ensures that stakeholders talk to one another, that they that we have common rules that are efficient and work when it comes to classified information and how much can be disclosed, for instance, and to whom and under what circumstances, to clarify the legal framework, who has what obligations, and are they automatic and clearly spelled out in the legal framework, for instance, for the private sector in terms of situational awareness and quick reaction, and what falls under the remit of the state, and to what extent the state can, let's say, mandate the private sector to provide information that can be proprietary and can directly affect the resilience of businesses in the respective sector, but at the same time it affects national security. And does that need to be voluntary, or does it have to be mandated under the law? So all of these things are genuine challenges, precisely because we're dealing with a very gray area, and precisely because the adversary is exploiting precisely these exact gaps that we still have, and I think it's probably natural that we have them. But we need to develop a framework within which we quickly address this. And I don't really see this facilitated, even if I look at the very recently presented national defense strategy of Romania. We see hybrid war, hybrid threats as being highlighted as one of the main challenges, but we don't really see a full architecture of at least ideas as to what steps need to be taken within the next 5 years, which is the lifetime of the strategy, to improve the basis from which we address that. I think on the positive side, we see at EU level an increasing reliance on hubs kind of framework. We see this for the maritime security hubs, for instance, since Romania is one of the countries that aims to host one on the Black Sea, and we see that there's this thinking developing which revolves around fusion centers, data fusion centers, information fusion centers, and communicating hubs, which on the one hand bring together the knowledge that exists and the capabilities that exist in one part of Europe, and then are able to communicate that with hubs in another part of Europe to allow for a sort of a 360 degrees coverage of the respective issue, of the respective threat, EU-wide. And I think that is the way to go, because with hybrid threats, since they are very in cross-sectorial and ever-evolving, the only way forward is one where on the one hand we streamline capabilities, avoid duplication, but at the same time make sure that we talk to one another in real time, and that member states are aware of what happens in other parts of Europe as quickly as possible. On the more negative side, I think a lot of these the steps that could be taken are still very slow because of the political reluctance in member states. It is still very contentious in nature to what extent member states are willing to cede decision-making power to Brussels when it comes to threats that essentially target society at large. So they're not necessarily just military in nature. And then given that they aim to undermine societal cohesion, the quality of democracy, let's say the political scene in any given country, it becomes very sensitive with what instruments you address that. And I think very often we have the temptation to say something like, well, sanctions can be one response. And we see when it comes to the Russian aggression in Ukraine that sanctions are only effective up to a point, and perhaps not necessarily in a context where you don't have an actual conflict and you don't have successive packages of sanctions and so on and so forth. You just have a measured response to a threat, which on the other hand can cause you significant damage. So I think there's still reluctance to what extent you can respond without escalating, to what extent you should respond with similar means, and what is below threshold and what can be seen as being above the threshold of conflict, and also to what extent you want to make that decision nationally. And then member states can have very different approaches. We see Poland taking much more resolute measures when drones, for instance, Russian drones, cross over Polish territory than Romania, which has been a lot more reserved in its response. So all of these things, I believe, are still work in progress, and perhaps much slower than they should be, given that we are dealing with, let's say, a level of ambiguity which facilitates the adversary's operation. And I'm now also thinking of Russia's shadow fleet, undersea cables, elections. If you have followed the debates around all of these things in the past few months, you have seen how difficult it is for member states to come to an actionable plan that is not just doesn't just signal the issue on paper, but actually develops very concrete mechanisms to address that. I will end here because I think it's the debate will be much more interesting perhaps than our presentations, and look forward to the questions.
Thank you so much for bringing up fresh ideas and reaching all problems concerning terminology. In the context, one country that has been often mentioned is Poland. So therefore, we have with us Ms. Agnieszka Ostrowska, Program Director from the Center for International Relations in Poland. Ms. Ostrowska, you have the floor. Can you hear us?
Yes, yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, it's great. Thank you very much for inviting me here. It has been really interesting in conversation. And yes, my country unfortunately has been mentioned here for a couple of times, and our experience as a playground for whatever we call it, hybrid war or terminology is not important. What is important is that this whole array of non-military tools like sabotage, cyber attacks, disinformation, I don't know, economic pressure, political submersion, it is our reality that we have to live on every day. And as you probably could see, the latest explosion of our railways, the train that usually goes towards Ukraine with the hub. It's an important route for aid to Ukraine, shows that actually nowadays it is much easier to win or expect to win this hybrid war without military tools, but using the whole spectrum on non-military. So this is my maybe my comment to what you have been talking about, and it is really very, I don't know, it is sad, and it is also very worrying that you do not need to have weapons, but you can have, I don't know, agents, but also you can have words that harm, and all these disinformation campaigns that we have to tackle that do not cost, but are quite often maybe more productive. And I would like to tell you a little bit, I was asked to do that, about our particular case about Polish answer to countering disinformation. But before I do that, I would like to stress again that building resilience towards disinformation is particularly important to us due to our geopolitical location. We share borders with countries that are like sources of coordinated disinformation campaigns, Russia and Belarus, and that makes our society even more exposed to foreign disinformation, to foreign influence operation. And that's why we need to do something about that. Especially in the light of course, I will just simplify things, but when we think about our neighbor, Ukraine, there are two narratives just perpetuated by Russian propaganda. The first is that Poland wants to annex western territories of Ukraine that used to be a part of Poland before the Second World War, which is not a case, and there is not even any serious debate about that. And then another narrative is that it tries to turn Polish people against Ukrainians, which is also very, very unfortunate thing, especially at times when we need to think about Ukraine as a country where you need to give help rather than turn your back against. And I have to tell you that in Poland we have realized how dangerous it is for that Russia is weaponizing information for years, even before it has become fashionable. Nowadays, a lot of, organization, also a lot of conferences are devoted to the issue of countering disinformation, enhancing media literacy, thinking about definitions also what is or what isn't hybrid war. We, in my part of the world, have been realizing that for quite a long time. Since the annexation of Crimea, we have started to develop projects, and now saying by we, I'm talking about my organization. I come from Center for International Relations. And it is many years that we have been implementing projects devoted to countering disinformation, to debunking propagandistic articles, to trying to strengthen people's resilience against fake news, disinformation. And I remember times when we were considered a little bit, Russophobic. What we were doing was not treated seriously. But then, fortunately, it was also thanks to, for instance, the activities of our, politicians, for instance, Anna Fotyga, who used to be our member of European Parliament. She kind of is considered a mother of the birth of East Stratcom within European External Action Service. So she initiated the idea that this is a war, that you have to do something, we as Europe have to do something to combat disinformation, especially Russian one. Now, of course, the actors are many more, and I totally agree with some comment that was made before, that you should kind of name and shame not only the directions from where the disinformation, manipulation goes, but also very concrete actors. Sometimes during our projects, we also tried, although it was risky, to name and shame people, particularly giving the name of the actors who were disinforming. Sometimes we faced processes then, so that maybe wasn't so easy, but at the same time, this is one of the strategies that perhaps you have to think about. And in Poland, we've got now very many organizations, very many, initiatives that are devoted to countering disinformation, that are devoted to strengthening people's resilience. There are so many that sometimes we feel that maybe there is a need to coordinate all of them, because sometimes it is like that we try to open the doors that have already been opened, and that we do things in a repetitive way. So we feel right now such a need to coordinate and to look for synergy. And maybe that's why, and now I would like to talk about the initiative that I was asked to introduce. Maybe that's why our Ministry of Foreign Affairs decided to create such a body, and I am a part of it. It is like an advisory council on resilience, on international disinformation. And that's quite a new entity. We started to exist. We started to meet regularly on a monthly basis in April this year. And yes, as I said, the main goal is to strengthen societal resistance to especially international disinformation coming from abroad. It is this famous FIMI. And formulate also recommendations to the ministry how to tackle with this problem. The strength of this body is that we come from different societies, from different backgrounds, and this is also something that we tried to do years earlier when we implemented projects. We tried to combine people from academia, think tanks, from technological companies also, because we realized that actually it is like a fight between Goliath and that's all what we can do intellectually fails when we think about all these big techs who are the perpetuators of disinformation and do not want to cooperate. So we understand that our mission is a little bit of Don Quixote. But at the same time, we try to do all we can to connect our forces and to promote this cooperation, across the public administration, everywhere, academia, local governments, civil society. I want to share with you some examples of our actions, which some of them are maybe more concrete, some of them are more, I would say, like appeals or simply statements. But thanks to the fact that we are created, that we are this body, the council dealing created by our Ministry of Foreign Affairs, that gives us like a bigger mandate to say things and also to be heard. So we, for instance, issued like public statements that were then promoted and that the press was talking about. It was Together Against Manipulation, the statement when we had the presidential elections, and we called for experts and everybody to give only verified, fact-checked information and do not spread conspiracy theories, which is quite common in, unfortunately, our press and social, also especially social media. We called for using reliable media and fact-checking networks. And we were such a voice of, I don't know, calming voice of reason during the times when the emotions would be really going very high. So what we try to do is to calm down the emotions, because when people are overexcited, this is always a moment when all the conspiracy theories and all the bad things can happen. People are more vulnerable in such cases. We also issued a statement regarding the intrusion of drones into Polish airspace, because there has been a lot of disinformation, and again Russia was using this opportunity to promote a narrative that the drones were Ukrainians, that this is Ukraine who is trying to involve Poland, to invite Poland to think badly about this country, that they were trying to drown us into the war. So this is also what we decided to do, to call on Polish citizens to critically verify sources, rely on credible media, do not share information that is based on emotions mainly. We have diagnosed that this is a problem, that this is something that is really very helpful for Russian propaganda, that there are so many so-called useful fools who share whatever they think is scary, but usually it is not true. But yes, the main object of our activities, the main issue was to warn that spreading these narratives that deny Russia's responsibility or try to shift a blame to Ukraine, it might also be a crime under Polish law. So that is quite a serious offense. As well as we wanted to emphasize unity in the face of these events. So these are some examples of things that we try to do, but at the same time, we do not want to exist only on paper. And we try to, with this bunch of experts that we have, we try to think about initiatives that might be more practical. Although, again, it is quite difficult because we all come from different backgrounds and we are all professionals, and we do not earn. That is a voluntary action, but. Yes, I will wrap it up very quickly. So we try to look for like synergy effects in what we are doing as professionals and what we do in our council. And I think that this is the only way that such initiative can last, because people who have, I don't know, only enthusiasm and they need to work, it is not enough. So we've been trying to, for instance, incorporate what we are doing in the council into the projects that we already have. For instance, now we are diagnosing the needs of our parishes, like the smallest portion of Polish local government. So we try to investigate what their needs towards countering disinformation could be and what they already know, what are the weak points. And we will prepare on the basis of that a series of trainings for these parishes. So we try to come up with very concrete actions. But again, our reflection when we discuss what is needed to be done is that without the help of the big techs and without their will to actually counter this malign disinformation content, our activities will always be just not that counting. That is quite a bitter conclusion. We are still trying to do whatever we can to prevent disinformation spreading in my country and also internationally. Thank you.
Thank you so much for presenting us some concrete example of what Poland is doing in the question. And now, coming up also in the realm of practicalities, I would like to invite Professor Arpa Todor, who is working at the Euro-Atlantic Resilience Centers in Romania, who is going to talk about the resilience to disinformation hybrid threats. Professor Todor, can you hear me?
Yes, yes. Thank you very much. So, having the honor to be the last speaker, I will focus on aspects that have not been covered yet. And just a small disclaimer, because you presented me on the agenda both as with my academic hat and my institutional, and I also have the opportunity to work directly with NATO on upgrading the resilience baseline. Just here I'm with my academic hat rather, so my opinions do not involve the ARC or the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So I will just mention a few points. So first of all, building on what Nabargan was saying about the difference between war and hybrid, is that war is always all the time hybrid. I would also mention that many of the things that we in the Center for Hybrid Threats label as hybrid measures are very close overlap with other societal processes. Just to give the example of the first major hybrid action against the EU, namely the Brexit. The Brexit was influenced in the later stage by the Cambridge Analytica scandals, the action of some operative, and the fact that some intelligence services attempted to manipulate what happened. But the process of Brexit was the result of the normal political life in the UK. So many times, and we've seen this also in Romania and in many other cases, there is no hybrid per se that appears out of somewhere. And this is a very important thing to do. And most of the hybrid war, hybrid threats try to exploit existing weaknesses. And for example, in the case of manipulation, but on many others, the lack of trust. This is especially in the East European countries, the lack of trust in institutions is systemic, and this is a major gateway for many of these activities. And for example, in Romania, the Minister of Foreign Affairs with National University for Political Studies and Public Administration had this project on combating hybrid threats, misinformation in the area of competence of the ministry, and the dedicated opinion pool showed that we have all the elements to be the target of such a hybrid attempt, because simply the lack, the level of trust institution, The approach to disinformation showed that Romania simply is not prepared to face what happened at the last election. Simply people know there is misinformation, but they consider they are not subject to this misinformation and they don't want any regulation. So within such an environment, it's very difficult. It's not very politically feasible to try to step in. Yes, so for example, the new national defense strategy mentions the low level of critical thinking, media literacy, security culture as a main problem and threats systematic weakness in Romania. But this is not something new. It simply is a systemic feature, simply that because of historical underdevelopment, the amount of literacy progressed, but it's still not enough to be very efficient to combine with the lack of institutional trust. Simply is very difficult many times to have state level actions against disinformation. Another point was mentioned by several of the speakers related to the difference between type of threats, and I would mention one major difference between hybrid and military threats is that while military is mostly based on the action on a specific doctrine, hybrid threats as hybrid actions usually are based on the try-it-all principle. And basically, in this, one of the major implications that is important to have conceptual clarification, to have to try to identify them, to understand, but simply it won't necessarily help to have a map for today to understand what comes to tomorrow. So simply this, in most of the case, you try whatever works, try 10, 20, 30 different activities, and maybe if one works, it will produce effects, and maybe it will be replicated. For example, what happened in Romania, we know has been tried in other countries. It worked, and there was no, we didn't manage to import the good practices from other countries. But then the next hybrid action will be most probably very different. So this is very important to mention and to keep in mind in the way we plan defending against such threats. For example, if we see what happened with the recent elections in Republic of Moldova, where we had an war on every single type of activity that Russia could apply on Moldova, we see that they managed to counter many of these, and the results of the elections indicate this. But on the other hand, many of the activities undertaken by the authorities in Republic of Moldova would not be feasible legally and politically in most EU member states, simply because you have much higher protection. So that's why it's one of the it's one of the strengths of democracies, but also this is one of the limitation in combating such hybrid threats, that you cannot just take measure, implement them immediately, especially if you're in a electoral context, because that's everything becomes politicized. It's very difficult to move towards accusation of attacking the electoral process, etc., etc. And also another aspect I would mention regarding what is the NATO EU collaboration, synergy, or lack of, is that many currently at the NATO level there is a much more opening towards introducing societal resilience, hybrid threats elements in its planning, the way it conceives its resilience. And one of the this is a very good thing, and because of, especially in the eastern flank, there's like a almost full overlap between NATO member states and the EU. On the other hand, it's very important to try to avoid creation of like a dualist way of approaching things, because this would destroy the synergy. And usually if you have different planning, different set of concepts, so basically the same kind of threats, this would might generate a huge problem and lack of coordination in the future. And I've just been this month at the Civilian Planning Conference in Sweden, and basically this was a NATO gathering to discuss about the new operationalization of new way of conceptualizing resilience. And what I've noticed, and this was in the discourse of the representative of from Sweden, Finland, and Norway, is that basically their national defense, national security strategies encompass all aspects. So basically, they reunified, as it's been, for example, also in Sweden and in Finland during the Cold War, all measures, approaches, institutional structures related to defense across all areas, including hybrid threats, are coordinated. And just to give an example, the head of the Swedish military and the head of the Ministry for basically resilience were both on stage, and they had a panel and where they discussed how Sweden is approaching various type of threats. We focused on resilience. This would be, I would bet it would be not feasible, not to say impossible in most EU member states. And this gives an enormous advantage, is that you don't necessarily know what will be the next threat, but you have the environmental culture, the type of coordination that allows you to rapidly adapt. And this is, as we've seen in many countries, and fortunately also Romania, coordination many times among various structures, agencies, is very difficult. And again, coming back to the lack of trust, this generates many times, even for example, if as we did, was mentioning about our project with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, if most of the things that happen in Romania were put in that public policy and the materials that you presented, operationalizing them in activities is many times very difficult. So it's that's the reality, institutional realities that and I've seen as my activity at the ministry many times. If people know, it's one thing to know, having signals from the academia is totally different to actually put into actions into institutional context. So I would stop here and hope I will still have half an hour for debate. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Arpad. You just anticipated the final part of our debate, question of question. And we have received a series of questions that are both addressed to the general speakers and also to one question in particular only to Romanian participants, you and your colleagues. So I'm going to read them now. I'm going then to ask you once more to have a short 3 up to 5 minutes wrap up, each of you, either tackling the question or coming up with something new that we believe that needs to be mentioned before. So the question, some of them have already been said by my colleagues. The first one is, looking ahead, what are the Council of the European Union's long-term priorities for preventing and countering misinformation and disinformation, and how do these strategies combine institutional measures with public education? And basically, it's about the role of the citizen in strengthening societal resilience. Then we have a rather interesting and dynamic question concerning the role of intelligence. And we have recently heard about intentions to create an intelligence cell and sharing mechanism within the EU. What radical ideas are on your wish list in order to counter hybrid threats in Europe and enhance resilience? And the last general question refers to the Council conclusion on the European Union strategy for the Danube region that calls on the European Commission to ensure the basis of the coherent development of both macro regions, meaning the Baltic Sea region and the Danube region. And the question relates to physical infrastructure and how should we apply this in order to build a better military mobility inside the EU and NATO that are badly needed and to enforce the critical resilience. And the last question, addressing Romanian, specifically to the Romanian speakers, is how we can harmonize the national strategies of Romania with the European initiative so that it can exist a coordinated response to hybrid threats. So basically, how can Romania set up itself with the EU initiative in order to not necessarily to be the outcast or the outlier in that question. So with your permission, I'm going to invite Ms. Alina Bărgăoanu.
Thank you, Mihai, and I listened very carefully to all the speakers, and really it's been a learning exercise for me too, which is great. If you allow me, Mihai, it will be an indirect answer, but I will point out to the example that Agnieszka offered to us about the Russian narrative that Polish would like to annex the western part of Ukraine. And this is a perfect example why we need international collaboration. This narrative has been present in the Romanian public space for at least 3 years. I remember it was breaking news on a major TV channel, which was mainstream. It is not part of usual suspects for my Romanian friends. When it was a breaking news, oh, pay attention that Poland is so invested into the Ukrainian conflict because Poland wants to remake the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, so basically to annex this kind of the western part of Ukraine. So for me, this is the perfect example why we need early detection mechanisms at a transnational level, because it is almost irrelevant that you tackle this narrative in the Polish space, for example. And again, I'm exaggerating in order to make a point. If this narrative flows freely in another EU country. So again, that was the perfect opportunity, Agnieszka, I mean, your example, to give a very specific example why we need cooperation and why we need early response. And these things needs to be coordinated. This cannot be left at the level of a cooperation between us as persons, as universities, as NGO or whatever. And this will be my broad answer, that in order to find answer to the topic of hybrid warfare, especially to the information and political warfare, we need leadership, we need credibility, we need funding, and we need implementation. Everything that has been said here is great, but without implementation, without credible implementation, and without pan-European implementation, I think that we will be in the same situation, or more likely in a worse situation, in the same situation or even worse. So that was my specific example. And the broad answer, again, leadership, credibility, funding, implementation, both at the EU level and at the local level in a synergetic way, of course.
Thank you. Is Roniko to this pretty fine set of questions?
Thank you. Thank you very much. I actually very much agree with the previous speaker, the credible implementation of plans, and especially from the ones that are coming from the EU level, how they are credibly implemented in the member states. This is really, really important. I wanted to finally also address the question of how an ordinary citizen can play, what kind of role an ordinary citizen can play in strengthening the societal resilience. Colleagues have talked a lot about disinformation here and countering it. I wanted to highlight the fact about media literacy and how our information environment is flooded with mis and disinformation. Our Latvian colleague mentioned that they have the national news broadcasters that are actually sort of the cornerstone of the democratic society. This is really important, that our citizens find credible news sources and they understand where they can get fact-based information and recognize opinions from information. The second thing is that governments, public administrations should really put efforts into producing fact-based information to minorities and different age groups. So we are always worried about the young generation, but this goes to all different age groups in our societies. Learning how to find the right factful sources. I mentioned in my intervention also the preparedness issues, and this is really something that needs to be emphasized to all the European countries, all the citizens of EU, that really you need to be prepared for different kind of situations, not only disinformation that going on in social media, but there's a lot of different kind of sabotage operations happening all the time that might have an impact on our daily lives. And this is really important. Maintaining a stockpile at home, for example, how to operate without electricity. This is really important. Finally, psychological resilience. We didn't address this that much today, but really how to prepare in advance, but also find good things in life in these sort of very negative times. This is really important, crisis mentality. Thank you.
Thank you so much for bringing up the emotional and psychological need for resilience. Now, Mr. Ginchao.
What I would like to build on what was already said just moments ago, and also to somehow answer the questions, which are quite different, is that we need to realize and acknowledge that we cannot keep pace with the vast numbers of narratives and messages and misinformation that is coming from online actors, right? And that means that we need to pick our fights. Then the question is, if we need to pick our fights because we cannot keep up with the vast amount of narratives that are coming, then how do we prioritize which fights are worth fighting and which fights are not worth fighting? And from this point of view, to also use the example provided earlier by Professor Alina Bărgăuanu, it's like, okay, we have a narrative linking Polish support for Ukraine with a Polish irredentist desire for annexing parts of Western Ukraine. Should we actually spend resources or not in fighting and contradicting this narrative? The answer is not self-evident, because the questions we need to ask are, is this type of narrative that the Russians are using in Eastern European countries effective? And when we think about effectiveness, we need to think about how do we measure that, right? Because Russians can throw at us with a lot of narratives, but not all of us, all of them can be equally effective, right? So we need to think, okay, the Russians are doing this. Why are they doing this? Because they want to basically break the joint effort and support the solidarity that the Europeans have shown to Ukraine and the Polish-Ukrainian partnership. But then, what's the target audience for this? The Polish public, the Eastern European public, the Ukrainian public. And the third question is this actually effective? Does it have any effect on the way people think about the Polish-Ukrainian relations or the Polish actions in supporting Ukraine? Because if it doesn't have any effect, then it will be a mistake to actually allocate resources to fight a narrative that is not effective. It doesn't work. It doesn't do what the Russians want to do. And instead of allocating resources to fight an ineffective message, we should allocate resources to fight narratives and strategies that actually work. So my point, which reiterates my intervention from earlier, is that both at the European level, the regional level in Central and Eastern Europe, to bilateral and multilateral or unilateral formats, but also in Romania's case, we need to think very well, when do we choose what fights to fight and how do we allocate the resources we have? Because it may be the case that not all fights are worth fighting. Thank you.
Thank you so much for reminding us the importance of better allocation of resources and picking our fights. And I would like now to invite Ms. Lipdanska.
Yes, thank you. I think that the first thing is to really understand and accept that hybrid threats are real issue. Meaning that this is an issue that is disrupting national security in some countries, specifically Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, Poland as well, and in many other countries. And I think this is the first step when thinking about coordinating response towards it. The next thing I think what is really important is since today I'm talking from the point and perspective of the Baltic states, I think it is really important for these countries to share their insight, their expertise to different member states. And in order for EU to have some common policy towards this issue, there needs to be one solid stance regarding this issue. And we know that in the context of European Union, not only in the context of hybrid attacks and hybrid threats, this is a difficult thing to achieve, right? So therefore, I think for the countries that are directly affected from these threats, whether they come from Russia, whether from Belarus or any other country, it is vital for them to be the front runners in the EU level to talk about these issues, to advocate about them. And I think by doing so, we have reached good progress, but still there are a long way to go. And from my perspective, I think that the first thing that is achievable is to, of course, inform society, to think about resilience in the level of society. And this can be done by securing the backbone of media, of independent media. That's one thing. And another, of course, is to think about how we can secure our critical infrastructure. Because looking from the perspective of Baltic states and of Poland as well, unfortunately, what the aggressor have shown us is that these hybrid attacks, they will keep coming. The aggressor will keep testing us. So it's mainly upon us how we react, how strong we are, and also how eager we are to, of course, tackle these attacks. And I think that first and of course foremost, this can be achieved in a coordinated response. But I also think that first and foremost, each country needs to strengthen its own national capacities. And of course, then think about a more coordinated approach towards this. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I'd like to invite Ms. Oana Popescu-Zamfir.
Yeah, I see there are people with raised hands, and I really wish this had been more interactive rather than a series of long speeches. So I will only refer to one question to leave time for people to speak, which is how Romania can coordinate its national strategy with the EU-level strategies and NATO-level strategies. Well, very easily by incorporating them in the national defense strategy, rather than not doing that, which it really beats me why it hasn't been done. It's easy peasy. Maybe if anyone had consulted experts, that would have happened.
Okay, and I saw raising hand from Mr. Zinovi, but he's no longer connected. And I'd like to invite Ms. Agnieszka Ostrowska and then Alex Georgescu, who seems to have a comment before giving the floor to Arpad. Yes.
Yes, I just wanted to, can you hear me? Because, sorry, I have some
Yes, we can hear
technical
you.
problems. Okay, so I just wanted to react to what has been said about the strategies, whether they are worthy to be paid. I think that we should think more about not reacting, but taking a lead, and also thinking about what narratives we should think of and with what narratives we should reach out to the audience. Because the banking saying, no, this is not everything, this is not enough. We cannot be always on the defensive position. We should go to the offensive. We should try to think of a narrative strategy that would be interesting, and also that would be sexy for all those who then share information, social media. And I know that it is very difficult because this is something that we've been talking about for like years. I've been participating in so many projects, so many conferences, and we always were talking about the necessity to come up with a story, to come up with a narrative. But then this positive narrative that, I don't know, democracy is good, that European Union also does not stink, this is not something that is interesting. Unfortunately, all these narratives which are based upon, I don't know, hate, emotions, war, disinformation are much more interesting for the audiences. So I think that we have to just make aware of that, but at the same time, the answer how to do it still remains open. We haven't found the answer right now. How to get through to people's minds with a positive narrative that would be interesting to be shared, to be believed, and to be, I don't know, captivating.
Indeed. Thank you so much. Now I've seen two raising hand. First of all, Mr. Zinovi Broide. Can you hear us?
Yes, do you hear me?
Yes, I can. We can hear you, and please also present yourself for the audience.
I
You
am.
have a question? Yes.
Yes, I have three positions. I'm director of Center Eco Resource, State Center, advisor of the head of governor of the region of Chernovutz, and I am a regional coordinator of 3Cs Initiative, Ukrainian National Platform. Therefore, I sent in advance my question, the issue. We have a lack of time. This is concerned maybe mainly for yesterday improvement by European Union, the new regulation for military mobility and its development, as well as for both using of military aims and at the same time for the social economic development of the eastern regions, of the eastern flank of NATO and European Union. Therefore, my question, maybe you can comment it. This is about the new transport corridor. This is not new. It was built in the time of Franz Josef. Along the former borders between Austrian and Russian empires after the Crimea War, which was very similar to, on its sources, on its results, very similar to nowadays Russia war against Europe, we can say. And therefore, the question is how to stress attention of Romania, Poland, and Ukraine mainly on this mainstream of this corridor from Baltic till Mediterranean area, because it's really for, especially for Romania, for three directions in Romania, from Ukrainian border to Iași and through them to Moldova, Odessa, through Bucharest till Mediterranean and Middle East, and through Transylvania to the Adriatic shore, as well as for Ukrainian. Therefore, the single thing what I want to ask you, it's vague still now, the position of Romania and of course Ukrainian, Romanian and Polish position, but for many years it was supported even by presidents of the countries. Therefore, if it's possible, I will show only one picture that all of you to understand. This is, you see the results of elections, last presidential elections in Romania and in Poland along this corridor. I don't show the Ukraine because we had not elections. And you see that this corridor in the mentality of the main part of population in the eastern regions of Poland and Ukraine, it's concerned the development for centuries, I can say. This is all away from Varangians to Greeks. And you see that if it's vague, this situation, the results of elections, this for Eurosceptics, both in Poland and in Romania. And therefore, I, as for your political discussion, what you have. It's very pity that I, through the blackout in Ukraine, has not possibility to participate from the very beginning, but maybe you can comment if you will find interesting. Mr. Seb, I can provide you by my coordinates. I suppose this discussion has enough additional value, not additional, even value for the topic what you discussed today. Thank you.
So much for your comment concerning the correlation between political results and infrastructure. And now we have a second comment or question from Mr. Alexandru Georgescu. Can you present yourself?
Thank you very much. My name is Alexandru Georgescu from ICI Bucharest, the National Institute for Research and Development in Informatics, which is a state research institute under the General Secretariat of the Romanian government. I would like to echo some of what the speakers have said, whom I congratulate on their very interesting speeches. And I want to emphasize the issue of economic war as part of the hybrid threats scenario, calling into mind two issues that we have discussed also in a working group that I moderate for the European Defence Agency on critical energy infrastructures. The first issue is the ownership of critical infrastructures, even partial ownership of critical infrastructures by potential systemic rivals and adversaries, and how that feeds not just into the idea of disruption, but also in the idea of influence. We have discussed how in a lot of the companies in the ENTSO-E, so the Association for the Electricity Transporters in Europe, have partial ownership by China, and there have been studies in this regard. And secondly, how before the war in Ukraine, the Russian operators bought Wintershalle in Germany, and we did not notice right before the second invasion, the 2022 invasion, that the levels of gas storage in Germany from Russian sources was much lower than they should have been, which had indicated basically a failure to transport and was actually part of an economic pressure tool for something that was upcoming, which is actually the invasion. And secondly, I want to point out, as part of this economic warfare, is that there can be an asymmetry of resolutions. We had recently the Nexperia example. So this is a Dutch company that was recently taken over by a group of Chinese investors and is now owned by a partially state-owned Chinese company. It's still headquartered in the Netherlands. The Dutch authorities took over the company out of fear that there will be an illicit transfer of technology to the Chinese. And what happened afterwards was that after the takeover, the Chinese authorities prevented the export of its products that were being manufactured for Europe in China. 80% of its European production was coming from China. It did not make semiconductors in China, but it was packaging the semiconductors in China, meaning the metallic elements of it, which are necessary for electronics. And in the end, this was resolved, this issue, but it was resolved in such a way that we can't be sure that the European authorities actually got anything with regards to the illicit transfer of technology and preventing it. So they could have easily just caved completely to Chinese pressure and have presented a different face publicly. So a lot of these elements regarding ownership, influence, and asymmetric results in hybrid confrontations are very interesting to look at, and we have to pay careful attention to them in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alex, for your comment. Are there any other comments or questions from the audience? If so, please raise your hand. If not, I'd like to ask our speakers if somebody can provide a comment on Mr. Zenobiev's question about transport corridors, or if that is in their area of research or not. If not,
I would make a very short comment related to that investment in infrastructure. In my speech, I said that in order to fight hybrid threats, you have to fight hybrid threats as such, but there are things that are outside the toolbox as such. And I think that the best toolbox is good governance increase of prosperity, the feeling that you belong to a community, good infrastructure, transnational cooperation. So again, we can have all the toolboxes in the world addressing disinformation, political warfare, no matter how you call it. But in the end, the resilience is based by the trust of people, and trust in institutions cannot be derived outside of the government exercise. So this is a perfect example that beside the fighting narratives, identifying early response, trust only comes from good governance, clarity, competence, and direction.
So,
Thank you. Yes.
yeah, I
Arpad?
just follow up on this regarding the corridor. So there was uh, a discussion in some of the countries, for example, like in Tulcea, because it's started to be used much more as a transport route without being a corridor. So the old routes were used to transport a lot of experts from Ukraine, and this has caused a lot of public outrage because there was no investment. The infrastructure was really stressed and without necessary benefits for the local community. So in this sense, in specific times, specific type of advantages or disadvantages can cause political effects. On the other side, I just mentioned that Romania is the country that had the steepest development in the last since 2000 and 2000 simply when we started the EU accession negotiations. So on every single metric, every single Romania is doing much better, and we still have a society that is very unhappy with the present situation, thinks the communist past was much better, although it's not on, basically there's no single evidence that you can point out except for the narrative, that there was some people were happier, life was simple, there was some predictability, but in terms of what was and even in terms of the quality of governance, which was really atrocious in many aspects, not to mention that there was a dictatorship. So that's why combating this kind of propaganda, sometimes like we had in Romania, not directly, but simply by having websites posting on how good it was during the communists, is very important to combat this type of influence. And coming back on the questions regarding the how different strategies could be aligned and there would be an integrated response, I would mention that this is not actually feasible, not even at the EU level. If you look at how different EU level strategies, way of defining, for example, resilience, there are different EU documents define resilience very differently. We don't have this at the EU level, and we don't have this at the Romania level. And many times it's simply because different institutions have different mandate, and there is no imperative mandate to get a total coherence. Many of the strategies are required by the EU, and they are aligned with what are the investments priorities, and then to unify them in, for example, like the national defense strategy is very difficult. For example, the national defense strategy, because it's adapted at the level of the presidential administration, is not correlated with other aspects, strategies adopted at the level of the government. Not to mention the parliament that is sovereign because it represents the people. So yeah, this is something to be desired, but it can be achieved only more through, say, coordination mechanism, but not via legislative requirements, etc., etc. But still, based on I would say, on the experience from the Nordic countries, that much of this is not so much about what is written on the paper, but how we can coordinate and have this shared worldview about what needs to be done and how you can do it. But allocating too much, like 10 years ago, there was a huge allocation of efforts and money in creating new public policies, strategies. And now we have in Romania so many public policies and strategies that they don't make sense together. So just there's always some pitfalls in going to the extreme. And most strategies and public policies are not actually put into practice. 90% of what is written in these strategies is never ever put into practice at any moment. It's just a strategy. We showed it to the EU, OECD, etc., and then that's it. So that's the reality of this. What really matters are the action plans, are the institutions that are apply various measures in various as a response to various threats. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. As we are fast approaching the end of our debate, I'd like to kindly thank you, both the speakers and the audience, for the 2 hours and so spent together. And we are looking forward to new events in this format or other formats. So have a great day ahead of you. And thank you once more, everyone, for your excellent ideas in your day. Thank you.
Thank you
Have a
very
nice
much.
day. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Thank you also.
Have a nice day.
Have a nice
Thank you.
day.
Have a nice day. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Have a nice day. Bye.
Bye bye. Have a nice day. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.